Hey nerdy knitters, Tanya here. Welcome to another episode of the Nerdy Knitting Podcast. Grab your favorite beverage and your knitting and let's settle in for a good chat. Hey knitters, it's so nice to be back talking to you. It's been a month since I've sat down to record a video. Our last video was the podcast episode for July. I took off the month of August just as a little break. I was working on some other things behind the scenes, but lots of relaxing time as well, watching a great TV show, which I'll talk about later, and reading and some knitting, lots of crochet actually, and family visits and lots of little trips here and there. We didn't really go anywhere for vacation. We just stayed home and relaxed, but it was really nice and relaxing. But I'm very happy to get back to my normal routine, sitting here and talking to you. Now, a few little updates before we get right into the knitting. The first of all is the professional knitwear designer course that I've been working on through the Knitting Guild Association. I finished module 3 and submitted it over this last month. That was one of the things I was working on, and I have officially passed the course. So I'm certified as a knitwear designer through the Knitting Guild Association. So if you have thought about designing knitwear for yourself, I recommend this course. If you want something that's really going to kind of hold your hand, but not really. You still have to do a lot of work yourself, a lot of work and research to learn a lot of these things, but there is guidance as well. And the instructor, Donna Eston, is fabulous. I've emailed her multiple times with questions whenever I had an issue that I couldn't work out, and she was very, very helpful. So if that is something that's interesting to you, you find a link for it down below and you can learn more about it. Of course, like, the course is not necessary. You can certainly start releasing your own self-published knitting patterns and submitting ideas to magazines to get published in other publications without having to be certified. But there's just so much that goes into designing that it's sort of, you don't know what you don't know. Like, you learn as you go, which you can certainly do, but this course sort of walks you through everything that you need to know. And sometimes there's things you don't know and you never figure them out. So this course is helpful with that, like covering all of the bases, all of the things you'll need to do both kinds of publishing, either self-publishing your own patterns or working with publications and submitting ideas and then working with them if your ideas are accepted. All of it's covered. I really do highly recommend it. It's a great course. It's a self-study program. I think you'd have a year to complete each level. And some of them I flew through. The first one and the last one I flew through. I did take my full year for the second one because I was busy with a lot of other things. And the second module is pretty big because you're doing grading, and that's a huge task to learn how to grade patterns. I don't think you need a full year. Like, if I had worked diligently, I could have finished it much sooner. But it is definitely a great course and something to consider if you want to design knitwear. Now, the second update I have is a pattern release. I had a pattern released in Cast On magazine, the Evergreen Lace Ruana. I'll pop a picture of it right here. Now, this uses yarn from Alley Yarns, her Silk Yak DK. It's a lovely, lovely yarn. I can't remember the colorway, but I will put it down below. But it's a superwash merino with 20% silk and 20% yak as well, a DK weight yarn. So this Ruana is actually worked a little differently than the standard way Ruanas are worked, which is basically a big poncho. It's open in the front. A South American, what's the word? It comes from South America, like the basic Ruana. But when you knit them, sometimes you start in the back and you cast on like the full width and you work up to the shoulders, and then you split the front, the left and right sides, and work them separately. Or you can do the reverse, work the right and the left and then join them and work down to the back, or work 3 pieces, the back and then 2 sides, and then sew them together. Now, instead of doing any of those methods, I decided, what about just making 2 long strips, like basically a wide scarf, and then sewing them together. So you get a seam up the center back and you leave the rest of it open. You seam like a third of it and you leave like a third for your neck, and then the other third is hanging down for the front on each side. So that's the method I went with, just to be a little different than the normal shape. So you're basically just knitting 2 long rectangles, 2 scarves. There's a bit of evergreen lace, or fur cone lace, I think is what it is. And then a lot of stockinette stitch, garter stitch along the edges, and really pretty simple and relaxing. So that pattern is now out. If you're a member of the Knitting Guild Association, you can free access to Cast On magazine. So I also recommend becoming a member. I just actually renewed my membership because it's super valuable. There are so many technical articles and things to read. I'm constantly referring to them. I'm working on sock tutorials right now and keep referring to, like this morning I was just looking at provisional cast on techniques, short row techniques, I think that's it, from that website specifically, because the articles are just so in-depth and helpful and technical, and then you've got all of the issues of cast on, however long that magazine's been in publication. They're all digitized, so you can access all of them on there. It's just a lot of wonderful technical knitting information. So I recommend you join the Knitting Guild Association. I think it's only like $35 US, 25 or 35 for a year. So it's definitely worth it to me. Now, the last thing to do before we get to our knitting is talk about a knitting book. And I have a new one on my shelf. I'm going to be reviewing this for Cast On magazine, the next issue, 10,000 Knitted Hats, Discover Your Own Unique Design Combinations by Jo Allport. Now, this book is pretty fun. It's like a mix and match sort of book. Like, there's instructions on how to use the format, but it's really the format that is fun. The pages are split into different sections. So each of the whatever size page this is split into thirds, and they're actually cut. I'll try to do a flat lay so you can see what this looks like. And then you can flip each section. At the top you have the crown, in the center you have the body, and then at the bottom you have the brim. So you can flip each one. There's 23 different little sections for each of these, and you flip each one and you choose your rib that you want for the cuff. You can choose the body stitch that you want, and then you can choose the crown stitch pattern that you want. And I've chosen 3 just randomly, and this is what I get. Now, I'm not sure I would actually knit this hat, maybe, but there's right there you can see. There's the hem, or the cuff of the hat, the body of the hat, and then up here we have a stitch pattern for the crown. So we could choose a different one. Say we want that crown instead, or we want a different cuff for our hem for our hat. So once we've chosen what we want, all the instructions are right there on that side. Just really fun. Isn't that really fun? Like, there's 23 for each section, your cuffs, your bodies, and your crowns. I think there's one less for the crowns. So you can mix and match all of them to create lots of different hats. So really, really fun. And then of course it has charts if there's charts that are needed, like for ferrule patterns or anything like that. Lots of other information in here as well. The tutorials in the back are fabulous. There's photos with all of them, really clear instructions. Really a fun book. If you like to knit hats and you need some more hat inspiration, then this is a good book. The only thing I don't love about it, I do love this coil binding because it lays flat, like you can knit straight from the book. But the one thing I don't love is that everything is knit flat. Like, you knit the whole hat flat, and then you have to seam up the right and the left edges, which seems odd to me. I've never knit a hat flat. It just seems so easy and simple to knit them in the round and not have that finishing to deal with. I mean, I know you can do it, obviously people do, but that seemed like an odd choice for a book. But that's the only drawback. But even then, if you're comfortable with converting stitch patterns, it wouldn't be difficult to switch it to knitting in the round. But it's really fun. You can see some of the hat patterns here on the back, all the different combinations that you can put together to knit a variety of hats. So off the needles, I have 2 things to talk about. The first is a pair of socks. This is going to be for our first, second, third, I can't remember, one of our sock tutorials. I've just been doing them in random order, whichever one I've decided to work on. So this is a pair of striped socks using Knit Picks Hawthorne. They're Kettle dye and the Speckle in the colorways, I think, Spark, Speckle, and then Delphinium and Compass for the other 2 colors. And what I thought is really interesting is how different the speckles look between the blue stripes and the yellow stripes. I actually prefer this sock, but I don't feel like knitting a third one to have a matching pair. I kind of like the oddball look of making the colors really different. But it's really interesting to me how different the colors of the speckled yarn look depending on which color is striped with it. I thought that was weird or interesting. I don't know. What do you think? So anyway, these socks are knit from the toe up. I think this was using 2 circulars. That sounds right. I've been working on the tutorials and they're sort of all blending together at this point. Now the heels and toes are using mock short rows. So no short rows here. We're using a garter stitch edge instead and just increasing and decreasing to create the shape. And so these start with a provisional cast on. Super simple cast on. There's no crochet, hook, or anything involved. That one feels so fiddly to me. This one we are working with a second cable needle, and we're just putting our stitches directly on that cable needle, which is perfect for 2 circulars, and then they just hang out there until we're ready to start working in the round. So you actually like cast on along the bottom of the foot, and then you're just working that way, and then turning and working that way, and then you join to work in the round. You pick up those other stitches, which are super easy because they're already on your needle cord. No crochet hook. I just love that. It's so simple. And then you start knitting the leg of the sock, and then you stop and you do the same exact shaping for the heel. It's exactly the same as the toe. We're repeating the process to do the heel, finishing with a little bit more of the length of the leg. I like short socks, so I just did a little bit, and a 1x1 rib, and finishing with a sewn bind off. So that will be one of our sock tutorials coming up. And this is Knit Picks Hawthorne yarn, which I really like for socks. If you've ever used Stroll, which is lovely and soft, but it can be a bit splitty, and sometimes I get holes more easily in the bottoms of my socks when I use that yarn because it's very soft and not as highly twisted. I think that one is that one merino wool? This one is a Peruvian Highland wool, and you can, if you held Stroll in one hand and this yarn in the other, you'd be able to tell the difference. This one is a little more woolly. It's just a little, it's not scratchy, but it's hardier wool, which your feet is not, they're not gonna be able to tell the difference. And for me, that hardier wool makes for better wearing socks. Now, the next thing off my needles was technically off my needles in the last video, but I hadn't completely finished it. It needed to be blocked, and it needed a lot of tassels, like 40 of them, I think. And the tassels really do finish it off. So this pattern is Lunae by Natasja Hornby. It is worked in 2 directions. You start by working this part here, this top part, which is just like a crescent shape. You start by increasing on one edge until you get to the center, and you start decreasing out to the other edge. And then after you finish that, you pick up stitches along the edge and you work this long border. So I really liked that construction. It was different. I'm not so keen on this top edge. I feel like there should have been some kind of finishing edge here. It does tend to roll a little bit, but I mean, it's not the end of the world. And the tassels, I think, really do finish it off nicely. Now, I have to credit this podcast for actually finishing this one. I've been working on everything else all month that I'll show you, but this shawl has been sitting in its bag since the last episode until like 2 nights before I had to record. And then I'm like, I really should get that done so it can be finished for the podcast. So because I had to record this, I actually sat down one night and did all of these tassels. It took me one night to make them all and then another night to get them all on the shawl. But they were worth it. I really like how cute they came out. Like, it's just nice. So the yarn for this is the blue and the gray are Cascade Heritage, which is a merino superwash fingering weight yarn. And then the white is just plain old Cascade 220 fingering, because I knew I'd need a lot more of that, especially for the tassels. So I figured I would save a little money and get a less expensive yarn for that 3rd yarn. Now for the works in progress, or the things that are on my needles. The first thing I just started, I mentioned it in the last podcast that I was going to knit them, and I have not gotten very far. These are the Kiperoosa mittens by Aleks Byrd. It's a publication, or the pattern is in her book, Estonian Knitting Traditions. I think that's the name of it. And I just fell in love with the pattern. I'll put a picture of it right here. And it included lots of, well, 2 techniques that are new to me that are Estonian traditional knitting. The first is fringe, which I have started. That's the first thing I've done. You start by just knitting your cuff, basically, and then you stop and you do this fringe. There we go. So you can see a little bit of what that looks like. I have a lot more fringe to do. And I have to say, it's not that fun. It's kind of tedious. She has these cute little wooden tools that she uses, you have to use to sort of size the fringe. I'm just using the handle on a crochet hook, and it's a rubbery handle, so it really sticks, which is nice because it doesn't keep falling out, but it's just kind of tedious to make this fringe. Now I have to do it in 2 colors on this next round, but it's not hard to do. It's pretty simple actually once you get the hang of it. It's just kind of tedious to do it, but I'm looking forward to seeing it finished because I think it's going to be really pretty and colorful. And then you can see on the picture the back of the mitten's going to have this beautiful sort of embroidery pattern going on, so I'm looking forward to doing that as well. Now what was really helpful, there are some tutorials in the book for this, but I prefer videos, so I hopped online and the author has some YouTube videos where she demonstrates these different techniques, so those have been super helpful as well. So for the yarn, the base yarn is a black Cascade 220 superwash. I wanted easy care for these mittens. Well, that's what I thought at first. And then the colors that I'm using for like the embroidery and the fringe is Knit Picks palette, which has to be hand wash, so not superwash. So still, I'll have to be careful with them. More careful than I would have to be with just plain superwash. So this is Cascade 220, the superwash fingering, and then the 2 colors that I'm using for the embroidery and the fringe are Knit Picks palette. I have tons left over from doing my level 3 master's program, the tam that I did. I had a lot of yarn left over, so I'm still sort of working my way through it with these projects. But I don't mind having this kind of yarn. I think it's a good idea to have a stash of colorwork yarn, and that's what this is. So if I ever want to do like any other sort of fingering weight colorwork projects, I'm starting to build up a little stash of different colors. So, and Knit Picks palette is perfect for that kind of knitting. So this is just 100% wool. It's a 2-ply, so it's good for lace as well, and really good for projects where you need just like stranded colorwork or Fair Isle or other like colorwork kind of projects. Now the colorways, I think it is Serrano and Semolina. I think. I don't have the labels anymore, or they're in the bag with all of the yarn and I couldn't be bothered to try to fish through the labels to find them, but I think those are the colors. Oh, and I decided to do them, I should explain this, I decided to do them 2 at a time, just to do everything all at once. And I'm using Magic Loop to do it. I actually wanted to do them with 2 circulars, but I needed US 2 needles, and I only had the 2 needle tips in that size, but I don't have smaller. That's the smallest in the interchangeable set I have, because one of the past episodes I was talking about 2 circulars and how I really like that method. I actually prefer it over Magic Loop. For some reason it feels like there's less moving things around when you have, even though you've got 2 needles, it feels like there's actually less work. But, and the tip that was shared was that if you don't have 2 needles of every size, which I don't, that if with your interchangeable set, the working needle should be the size that you need to actually knit with. So in my case, the US 2 would be the yarn or the needle I would have to work with. And then the other needle can be a size smaller. It doesn't really matter because you're never really working with that needle. It's just holding stitches, which is brilliant. I don't know why I didn't think of that, but thank you to those of you who mentioned it to me. That's just a fabulous tip, because I don't have 2 sets of every single needle. But sadly, with my interchangeable set, the US 2 is the smallest size. So I don't have a smaller size needle to put with this set. So I'm stuck with Magic Loop. So I did make a note that I'm going to buy another set of US 2 tips. I do have multiple tips, like the ones I use the most are like 4, 6, and 7. So those are ones where, like with my interchangeable set, I use the ChiaoGoo needles. I just bought extra tips in those sizes. So I'd always have some in case there's 2 projects that need the same tips. Instead of having to take the needle tips off and transfer them, it's just easier to buy extras. So I made a note, I'm going to buy extra US 2 so I can actually do the 2 circulars method with them. But that was such a fabulous tip to share, so thank you. I have to share it with you, if anybody else who wants to try knitting with 2 circulars, because give it a try. If you like Magic Loop, I think you should try 2 circulars just to see if you like it just a little bit more. I was surprised. I thought it would be really tedious and weird and wouldn't like it, but I really do. I really like it. I actually like it more than Magic Loop, and I like Magic Loop pretty well. Now, the next thing on my needles is a design, and I haven't actually worked on that this much. I started it just after the last podcast episode, but then when I was sort of on my vacation, I stopped doing any sort of design work and just did personal stuff that I wanted to work on. So this project is the Ocean Waves cowl, and it uses 2 colors of chroma yarn, this plain bare white yarn, and then this sort of gradient colorway called Cousteau. Let me see, I can't remember what this yarn is. So it's 70% superwash wool, 30% nylon. So you could use it for socks, I suppose. It does have a pretty good twist. But it is on the soft side, so I'm not sure how well the socks would stand up. So this was my original swatch. You can see right there. I used the white as the background and then had these, it's upside down, let's go that way. And then I had like some leftover, I think a little mini skein set of Knit Picks gradient yarns, and I just sort of moved through them to create that gradient design. But then I decided it would be much easier, instead of having to switch yarns all the time, to just get a gradient yarn. And then I was looking at this and I started knitting following this same, where the white is more the obvious background color and then the blue is the pattern, and I kept thinking, I'm not loving that, and I switched it. So the blue is the background and then the white is the pattern. And my daughter she was also like, yeah, you should switch those colors. And it does look much better. And I do like it a lot better. The colors are just lovely and very oceany. So the blue is the background color, and then that white is the pattern color, and we get that gradient effect in this. So this is going to be a cowl. It's knit in the round until I use up all the yarn and I finish like on the last row of the pattern, repeat so it will match up. And then I will sew the cast on edge to the bind off edge, and you get that round shape. So your cowl, you'll only ever see this nice side. All of that will be on the inside. You won't ever see it. So both sides of the cowl will look like this. So you'll wear it like you're knitting it lengthwise to go around your neck this way, not like knitting a cowl that's going to fit over your head through the circle, basically. Do you know what I mean? So you're knitting a long tube lengthwise, you sew up both ends, and that finishes it off. And it's just really, just stranded knitting, nothing particularly hard, just 2 colors. And well, with that gradient yarn, you get all of the lovely colors without having to switch colors yourself and have all those tails to weave in. So there'll just be a couple tails at the beginning and at the end. And honestly, I might not even weave them in. You leave them inside when you're sewing the edges together, and then tuck your ends in, so there's really nothing even to weave in. And alternatively, you could do a provisional cast on and then graft it to the last row, but I don't mind just sewing the ends together. I don't find that difficult, but either method will work. But I'm very happy with the yarn. It's really nice and soft. It's got a little bit of a halo to it, which is nice for something like a cowl. And the colors are just sort of very lovely and soft and muted. They do get darker as you go, so I'm looking forward to working on this again. I've got another project that I can't show you because it's for a magazine, and certain places they let me share. I ask specifically if I can, and some of them it's like an absolute no, because you keep it quiet until it's published. And then other places like Cast On Magazine, they're totally fine if I talk about things ahead of time. But so when I'm designing, I try to focus on one project a week. It's just easier that way. I can like sort of work on the pattern and the knitting at the same time. So this one I'll get back to, but right now it's another project for a magazine that I can't talk about, then another one that's coming up for another magazine that I can talk about, and then I can get back to this one. So it's a mix of trying to balance published designs and self-published designs, and then of course tutorials for socks. I also have to design those, so it's a lot of knitting right now coming on. But I enjoy that, but it can get a little bit overwhelming when there's a lot of different projects that all have deadlines and things like that. But this one, yeah, it's easy and it's simple, and I'm looking forward to getting back to it. The pattern should be super simple. I might break my own rule about work knitting. I only do design and work related knitting during the week, and then usually from Friday afternoon, unless I really have a deadline coming up, to like Monday, my weekend, I just do projects that I want to do for myself, nothing that's technically work. But this one is sort of mindless. I mean, you have to read the chart and pay attention, but it's not hard to do. It's just stockinette stitch. So it might sneak over into my weekend knitting just so I can get further along in it, since I have not done very much on this, but we'll see. Now, another project that I talked about last episode was using up a pile of yarn that was donated to me. And I have a few different projects. I just cast on a hat, the Tin Can Knits free pattern for like their basic hat. I can't remember the name of it now off the top of my head. So that, I don't have that here with me. It's in my purse out in the living room. But the other project that I'm working on is a scarf, and the pattern is A Good Scarf by Barbara Benson. And this pattern, I love it. It's so simple. It was supposed to just be like my weekend when I'm off somewhere, when I go to church or I'm out and I just need something quick and easy to work on. That's not just garter stitch. I don't like to just knit garter stitch. I want something going on. And this one has enough going on. It's still garter stitch, but you have a slip stitch edge, and then you're also slipping a few stitches in the garter stitch and then purling a few stitches, so when you flip it, you're slipping those stitches. So it's totally reversible pattern. Just very simple, but I just like the look of those linear lines on there. It just looks really nice. So I had, when I went through that donation stash, I pulled out the yarns that had like a large amount of yarn. So I've got like 4 skeins of this orange yarn here. I'm on the last skein now. So I didn't go out much, which this was supposed to be my going out knitting, but I started watching a new show, and that's where this project came in, because it was in Turkish and I had to read the subtitles to pay attention. And I still wanted to have something in my hands. I can't just sit and watch TV. I'm assuming a lot of knitters are like me. You are working on something when you're watching or listening to something else, because I can't just sit and watch TV. I can sometimes if it's a very engaging show, but for the most part, my hands are working on something, because I can pay better attention if my hands are doing something. That's why I knit in church too, so my mind doesn't wander and I can actually pay attention to the sermon. So this project ended up coming out when I was watching this TV show, because I could work on it. So my hands were busy, but it was so simple enough that I didn't have to really pay a ton of attention, so I could read the subtitles. Now the show that I want to tell you about is so cute. I don't know how to pronounce the Turkish name. It's ChiaoGoo, or Early Bird in English. I'm going to put a link to the English subtitle playlist down below. It's an absolutely adorable show. It's very cute. If you like a small town, quirky village kind of show, like, I don't know, Gilmore Girls, or I'm trying to think of there's some British shows I like where it's like small, quirky village people, you know, kind of like that. But cross that with like a Spanish telenovela, you know, where it's like over the top soap opera, ridiculous a little bit. It's sort of like that. So combine those two things, and this is what this show is. It's a bit over the top and ridiculous, and this guy's spying on his brother and making sure, but he's convinced this girl to help him spy, but she falls in love with the brother, and like somebody else is trying to like ruin this marketing agency, like that kind of like just ridiculous, over the top. But then, you know, the small Turkish village where the girl and her sister live, you know, so you've got all these neighbors who are in each other's business, basically. And it's a cute little romantic comedy. It's like 160 episodes, and I watched them all over vacation. It's ridiculous, like, but it's sweet and it's cute, and there's no language, there's no sexual content. Like, I think there's like, I don't know, maybe morality laws about what can be viewed or created in Turkey. So it's all very just sort of sweet and innocent. There's a bit of kissing and some hugs, and that's as far as anything goes. It's just a sweet show, but a bit ridiculous and over the top. But if you like romantic comedies with, you know, that sort of, I don't know, I love the culture. I loved seeing like how they make their tea and the things they eat for their meals, and just it's a very neat look at Turkish culture as well. Especially like that small town, like the little village that you would grow up in, you know, with your local butcher and your local grocer. Just a very sort of sweet show. I mean, it's a bit ridiculous, I'll definitely say that. And I mean, you get lots of crazy storylines, but it's cute. So I'll put a link for it down below. And if you like subtitles, if you don't mind reading subtitles, then you could give this show a try. Anyway, I recommend it. It's just a little adorable show. But anyway, that's why I was working on, this is supposed to just be while I was out and about, you know, going to church and wherever I'd have time, a few minutes to knit. But it ended up being a project I worked on quite a lot over this last month because I was watching that show and I needed something that I didn't have to pay too much attention to. I did try to crochet. I'll talk about that project next, but I could not crochet and watch that show because you have to count a lot with your crochet. Even if it's simple, you're still sort of counting with the squares and things I was making. So I kept losing track of where I was in my crochet pattern. So that one I can do when I don't have to pay more attention than I do when I'm reading subtitles. But anyway, so I got a lot of this done and I'm on my last skein of yarn. So I imagine I'll probably get that done pretty soon. And the pattern is just, Barbara, you created a beautiful pattern. I'm going to tag her again because I feel like this is my kind of potato chip knitting. You know, that you just want, like when you have potato chips, you don't have like just a handful, you have like half a bag. That's why I don't eat them very much. That's the kind of knitting this is. Like you just sit and you just start knitting and you just let it go. It's still garter stitch. Some people just love garter stitch. I don't. I want something else with it. So for me, this is enough. And I highly recommend this pattern. And I already have another set of 4 skeins of yarn because when I finish this one, I'll probably just cast on another one because it's just that kind of potato chip knitting. The last thing on my needles is actually on my hooks. I'm working on a crochet project. I have wanted to improve my crochet skills. I know the basics, you know, like the single crochet and double and half double, and I can make a decent square and a granny square, but that was about it. If I ever needed to do a decrease or something, I had to like go look up a tutorial because I didn't remember how to do them. So I figured I wanted to improve, but also because sometimes I write articles. Along with designing, I do write technical articles and things. And for one publication, they wanted me to talk about crochet as well as knitting for the articles that I was working on. So I had to do some research and refresh my memory on different crochet techniques so I could really flesh out that article well enough. So I figured I should improve my skills so I can have those skills in place if I ever have to do any more writing on crochet as well as knitting. But still sort of secondary. I'm not going to be crochet designing or anything like that. I might do some amigurumi. I've been looking at some and they're so cute. But anyway, to improve my skills, I have been looking at the Janie Crow patterns, or her name's Jane Crowfoot, but her website is janiecrow.com. And she has lots of fabulous, just beautiful, beautiful blanket patterns. So I picked one that had been used as a crochet along. I keep wanting to say knit along, but crochet along. So the pattern is free on the Stylecraft website. This is the Fruit Garden Cal, or knit along, or crochet along. Now I have finished the center. That was my big project that I've really been working on over the summer. So you can see a lot of it right here. This is the center panel, all of the flowers, and I've just finished the border and woven in the ends. So that part is all done. You've got all of these squares with all of these different floral motifs, and then the border. Now I have the border to do around the outside. You can see on the picture here what it should look like. So while you're working on each of these squares, she's really divided the pattern up really well so you're not getting overwhelmed with doing all this finishing at the end. Every time you finish sections that can be joined in the center, you start joining them right away and getting your ends woven in. So by the time you get to like the week 5 or whatever, you're finishing this whole center panel with the rest of the finishing. And then the border, which is a bit tedious. You've got sort of this striping pattern here. That was a little bit tedious, but not bad. But then while you're working on each of those squares, you're also doing a little bit on this motif, which I'm glad she did. Instead of saving the whole motif for the end because it's so intricate, you do tiny little bit, like you just do up to this yellow flower in week 1, and then you add a little bit more in week 2, and then you add more in week 3. So you're just doing a few rounds with every sort of clue. And this is a major piece that will go around the outside. I think there's 8 of these that will go sort of around the border around this central panel. So I've finished clue 5, so I have 3 more clues to go, which will be working on the flowers that will go in the border, and then finishing up these motifs, and then putting it all together at the end. So it's really coming along. I am learning a lot, and her videos have been so helpful. She has a YouTube video for each clue, like long, like anywhere between like 20 and 40 minutes long, that covers everything. Like, she doesn't repeat it. If this like center flower is the same as another one, then she'll just refer you back, like, just go watch that because it's the same. But then every time there is like something new, she covers it in good detail. And then she also has lots of little tips and tricks. You know, those things like when you've been knitting or crocheting for a while that you just sort of do out of habit. But then like when you're teaching it to somebody else, you have to think, okay, I should teach them this little tip and trick to help them, you know, make something look neater. And she has lots of tricks like that about, you know, like taking out or moving the tail when you do the first chain at the beginning, moving it to the back, or after you do your slip stitch to join, moving that under the stitch to the back, just so it looks neater and more finished, and just little tips like that. Just so useful. So the yarn in the original pattern, she has two different yarns. The first one is a Stylecraft yarn, a DK weight, I think, but I ended up using Knit Picks, their Brava, so 100% acrylic, the sport weight, and the crochet gauge was the same for the sport weight as the Stylecraft yarn, so I went with that yarn. And I'm using the needle size she recommends, even though the yarn is different, and my gauge is spot on with hers. So that has been really nice and just a good way to learn all those crochet skills. I still have to keep referring back to some, you know, like when I had to do some decreases, I had to go back and refresh my memory again, but it's starting to stick in there a little bit. So this is going to be a gift for my mother-in-law for Christmas when it's done. She knows about it already. I like to give knitted gifts, but only if they're wanted. So I like to ask first, because everybody, I mean, people like different things. I'm not going to be offended if somebody doesn't want something that I've knit or made for them, but I'd rather know ahead of time before I put a lot of work into something if they don't want it, you know? So I did ask first. I showed her a picture. I'm like, I'd like to crochet a blanket, but I don't really need a blanket. And do you want one? She's like, ooh, that's pretty, I'll take it. So she knows she's getting this. But I already have thoughts about knitting another one, because I have a chair over here in the corner that I like to sit in. The dog usually sleeps there. We call it her bed. But it's just this pretty yellow chair, and I thought it would be nice to have like a really colorful blanket to throw over the back. So I might make another one. She just has, Jane Crowfoot has so many lovely blanket patterns that it's just hard to choose. They're just so pretty and colorful, and I love all the flowers and the motifs and the designs. So most likely when this one is done, I might actually choose another one to work on and actually knit one for me. So we'll see about that. So I have 3 projects that are sort of upcoming. I still have quite a few things on my needles, but I've got 3 more things that are coming up. That design that I'm working on that I can't show you, I hopefully will have done this week. Then I can start another design that's due in October for cast on. So I'm going to be using the Universal Yarns Deluxe Bulky Superwash in this lovely Christmas red. Red doesn't really show up so well sometimes on camera. It's a very just bright Christmassy color. Probably should have chosen a different color because I didn't think about photography. Like sometimes you have to think about the colors. And some colors don't photograph as well as others. White can sort of get blown out. Like I have a white sweater I love, but I don't like to wear it when I'm recording because it gets super bright and makes the color balance weird. I don't even know about stuff like that. But then also black doesn't show up well, and red is another color that sometimes just doesn't look right. But anyway, I didn't think of that when I was choosing colors. So this pattern is going to be another cowl, but in a bulky yarn with, see if I can show you my swatch here. This sort of chevron lace. It's really simple lace, just a zigzag lace with a picot edge on each side. So you're doing a picot cast on and a picot bind off. But instead of just like a cowl up here, I've got 6 skeins of this yarn. I want like a big sort of a cowl, but you could pull it over your shoulders if you wanted to, like a poncho, but not a poncho. It's not going to be that big that it comes all the way down to your elbows to your neck. But you can scrunch it all up around your neck if you want, or pull it down over your shoulders, so wide enough for that. Or is that called a snood, where you have something like that and you can pull it up over your head? You could do that with it if it's long enough. I'll have to think about like how long I want it to be. But I just thought it would be fun to have sort of this bulky, oversized lace, you know, in this big cowl, or, you know, pull it down over your shoulders if you want. I don't know, lace usually do, and you know, on lace weight yarn or fingering yarn or maybe something a little heavier than that, but you don't usually knit lace on a bulky yarn. So I thought it would be, I don't know, just a different take on lace in this big bulky design with this big chevron shaping. So I'll probably start working on that next week. We shall see. And then it's due in October, so I've got to get this one done and out the door, but it shouldn't take too long to do, and the design is pretty much done. I already have the stitch pattern, and then I just have to sort of work out like how I'm going to do the picot on the edge. And then the next thing on my needles is another pair of socks for our sock tutorial series. I finished 2, I'm working on the 3rd now. So this is using Hobby yarn. Their Dolce sock yarn, it's 75% wool, 25% nylon, or polyamide, which is nylon, I think, or is nylon a polyamide? Which way does that go? And then for a contrast color for the heels and toes, I have their 4-ply sock wool, which is also 75% and 25%. So this one is, let me see, I don't see a color name on here. Color 40, so purple, and I don't see a color name here either. Color 03. I don't know, they don't have color names, but it does produce sort of a gradient between like a peach and a light pink and a purple with some speckles, purple speckles in there. And then I think I matched it up pretty well. I was looking at colors online, and then so the purple speckles in here are pretty close to the purple that is here. So this will be for like the leg and the foot of the sock, and then I'll do the contrast color toe and heel. So I'm working out the short row technique. We're going to be doing short row, heel and toe, which is kind of fun because they're the exact same thing. So once you've done one, you can do the other one like your eyes closed. Same thing. But I'm trying to decide, my go-to is German short rows. I just like them. They're easy to work. But I thought I would try a different one for this. So I've been looking at shadow wrap short rows, and I might use that instead for a different technique. So starting with provisional cast on, and then working the toe shaping, and then the foot. I think I'm going to do a stitch pattern too. I might do some sort of like a rib, garter rib or something like that. And then stop and you do the heel in the contrast color. Maybe finish off with a little stripe in the cuff. So that's the plan for this sock. And this is going to be a magic loop sock. So one sock at a time on magic loop for this yarn. And then I still have a few more tutorials to do after that and get them all recorded so they'll be ready to go. We're going to do one tutorial a month for each of the different knitting needle configurations. So we've got 6 different knitting needle configurations, so we'll have a tutorial for each of them starting in September. So my last upcoming project is another personal project. I'm going to be knitting the Rose cardigan by Andrea Mowry. Now this one has been on my list forever, but I couldn't find the yarn that I wanted to use that wasn't crazy expensive because I wanted to do like the fade technique. But that's generally pretty expensive yarn for a whole sweater, especially when you're knitting a larger size. So it's been sort of on the back burner. And then I've done some yarn dyeing with like Kool-Aid and stuff like that, and I really loved it. It was a lot of fun. So I decided just to buy some citric acid and some Jacquard acid dyes right from Knit Picks and try my hand at dyeing my own yarn. And I figured, why not dye yarn for a sweater? What? I don't know what I was thinking. I should have started with a smaller project instead of enough yarn for a whole sweater. But there we are. And the rest of the supplies, it was like the dollar store and then one pot. I bought a pot brand new from the store because I wanted a nice big stainless steel kettle. And then I got a few more smaller ones from like the secondhand store. The one thing now I'd like to get is like a large square roasting pan that I can use over 2 burners, but I need a stainless steel one for the dyeing, and I have not found one used, so I might buy one new, but we'll see. I'm trying to do it on the cheap. I'm not like going to be yarn dyeing for a business. It's just for my own use, so I don't want to spend a ton of money on all of the supplies. But I haven't really. I've bought dollar store stuff and one pot from the grocery store. So I dyed my own yarn. And this is the gradient I've ended up with. Now it didn't quite work out the way I wanted. I had issues. And I used, my first thing was, I think it's easier to learn on superwash yarn because you've got to deal with hot water and you don't want to mix and stir, but you've got to do some to get like everything evenly coated. And when I was putting this in, caking this up, I had some felting in spots and I had to pull the yarn apart because it was, I was doing too much with it, like moving it around too much in the hot water. That would have been simpler if I had used superwash yarn. That wouldn't have happened. But it wasn't that bad. It was just on a couple skeins. So that was okay. So I did 4 colors. This first one at the top is just a sapphire blue. Now I bought some different, I knew I wanted some blues and maybe pinks and purples. So I bought like the base colors, like you know, your blue, your red, your yellow, and then also like your turquoise, your magenta, and the same yellow. So I could have like the 3 colors you need to create all of your colors. But I knew I wanted different shades of blue, and I didn't want to try to like mix them with the colors. So I bought like a turquoise, well I had the turquoise, so I bought a sapphire blue and a sky blue as well, to give me some different blues to work with, because I knew that was like sort of the main color I wanted to go with. So I started with just the sapphire, just the blue all by itself, and tried to get like as even a dye as possible, and it came out pretty good. I mean, it's still obviously hand dyed. There's some darker and lighter areas. And then the second one, I used 2 different colors, the sky blue and the sapphire blue together. So I used, I follow tutorials on Craftsy. There are a couple classes with Sarah Eyre. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right. It's like E-Y-R-E. I'll link to them down below though. But the first class, she covers like all of the basic things, like the solid, like knitting, dyeing a solid color, and how to do that with an indirect pour method. And then using something called the veil technique to do 2 different colors, so you can see the difference. Like this one's solid, more solid over here, and then this one has got like more of a 2 color effect in that color. I don't know how well that's going to show up on there. But I rewatched and watched those videos on Craftsy to do that. And then what did I do next? Oh, I did this one last. I knew I wanted to end up with like a turquoise. So this one, this one, because this was supposed to be my last color. So I started with a turquoise, and then just plain, but I wanted it to be sort of pale, and then I could put speckles on it. It came out darker than I wanted, and then when I held it near this, it was like such a huge difference. It was more like the color I'm wearing. So like fading from this blue to this, like you'd see obvious stripes. So I kind of put that on hold, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. So I just kind of left that there, and then I went on to my third color, where I knew I was going to do something variegated, and I wanted it to sort of marry what would have been like this pale turquoise with speckles with this sky blue and sapphire. So I did a variegated yarn following another tutorial from that Craftsy class, using the sky blue and the turquoise, and then also some magenta, which ended up like bleeding over into the blues to give me all these purples as well, which I think came out really pretty. I'm going to show up, there it is. So I did just like a variegated method where you have 3 different Dixie cups, or the red silo cups, you know, and with the 3 different colors, and then I sort of spooned them over different places until I got pretty much covered the yarn. I didn't want any white patches. So after I'd done this one, I was thinking that would be my bridge color. But it was too much of a difference between these 2. And I knew like if I started to do like a fade technique, it was going to be really obvious stripes. And I still had this one, which was more like this color when I'd finished it. So I'm like, maybe I'll switch these 2 and put this one here by like sort of doing something else to it. So I had dye left over from doing the variegated yarn, so I dumped it all together to get like a purple basically, and I had already dyed this with the turquoise, so then I dumped it. This is actually the one that felted, and that is probably why, because I dyed it twice. I put this in the pot with like that leftover purple yarn, and it sort of glazed over it. So I've got it was turquoise to start, and then I glazed it with that purple yarn, and then I put some speckles on it on top. After it had dyed the purple, I like took it out, and I just dumped dry powder using a little paintbrush. So you can see we've got some of those blue speckles, sort of speckled, but because it's not superwash yarn will pick up those speckles really quickly. Wool without untreated wool takes a little bit longer, or if I had less water, I mean, I've never done this before. It was still new, so then those speckles would be more obvious. This one, it turned into more like little, I can see some of the speckles when I'm looking at it, but a lot of it spread out. and didn't speckle. It just sort of made little pools of color. So what I ended up doing then is switching these two. Instead of being the last one over here, I switched them. So now it's going to go in this direction. So I don't think it's as bad. I think I'm still going to end up with some striping between the middle two colors because there is still a lot of difference between them. But I don't know what else to do to like sort of make them more similar without making them the same. And well, I can't really do too much else to that yarn, I don't think. But yeah, so this was like 2 days of dyeing yarn, and dyeing yarn is hot. You've got lots of hot water in this pot, and I liked it, but it's a lot of work. But I will probably do some more. I already got some bare mini skeins, some superwash yarn this time, and I was thinking I would dye them up into some gradients and use them for some giveaways in the future. I thought that would be fun. But this one was sort of my practice, and I could tell even when I was doing it that I was getting better at what I was doing, because my first color, when I went to rinse it, I got quite a bit of blue dye in the water, and I'm not even sure I got it all out, but I don't mind if there's some, if it sort of moves over into the other colors, because for this sweater. But by the time I finished with the last two, I was getting no color left in the water, so when I was washing the skeins. So I'm guessing I either had not used enough citric acid, or I didn't let it like sit long enough to absorb. I don't know. I'm still new at this, but I'm pretty pleased with how they came out. And if you're going to try this at home, I do recommend it. It's a lot of fun. Start with some Kool-Aid, because that has the citric acid in it already, and get some superwash yarn and just sprinkle it on, because it'll stick right away. That was the first time I did it. It was lots of fun. But if you're going to do like real acid dyes, you need like separate dishes and things. You can't use the stuff in your kitchen because the dyes are toxic. And you have to wear a mask when you're using like the powders. And oh, my last bit of advice is when you're prepping your skeins, you can use like, I think a lot of people use like the zip ties, like the plastic ones. I didn't have any and I didn't want to buy any, but I have like cotton twine in the drawer. So I used that, and I tied them in 2 places. I think next time I'll tie them in 3 or 4 just to make sure, because it was they really become a tangled mess. And the more ties you have, the less tangled they will get. And if you use cotton, then it doesn't dye. With this kind of dye, it works for animal-based fibers. So cotton's plant-based, so it won't dye the cotton twine. So it just sort of glows in the water, and you can see it and fish it out with a spoon and then grab it with your hands and use that to move the yarn around. So lots of fun. I definitely recommend the Craftsy classes to really understand all of the basic methods. The first one covers like the basic things, and then I just started watching, there's a follow-up like next steps in yarn dyeing. I hadn't seen it before. I don't know if it's a new course on there, but that one covers more like making self-striping sock yarn, or gradient sets and things like that. Like the first one covers all of like the basics, you know, knitting doing a solid, then the variegated and a two-tone, adding speckles and stuff like that, like all the basic things. But I'll put a link for them down below. Really great course if you want to get started with some yarn dyeing. So that's all the knitting talk, and of course we have to finish with probably your favorite part of the episode, our monthly giveaway. This month is for our dishcloth lovers. I love to knit dishcloths and give them away, or I have to knit some more for myself because I'm starting to get ragged and worn out. So 2 skeins of Knit Picks Dishy, which is my favorite yarn for dishcloths. If you like a worsted, sturdy weight yarn, this is perfect. Now this first one is in their solid colorways. This is Jade. There we go. And then the second one is the Dishy Multi, which is like sort of a variegated yarn. I don't think it's like a self-striping. It's more of a variegated yarn. This is Aquarium Multi. So it's lots of sort of turquoises and teals and pale greens. Very, very pretty. And along with these, which means you're probably going to get, I don't know how many dishcloths can you get from 1 skein of Dishy. 3 or 4, I think. So it's a lot of dishcloths right there. And along with that, you're going to get this book. And this is a really thick book. The Scrub-A-Dub Club from Knit Picks. So you can see how thick it is. It's not just a thin little booklet. So there's probably a lot of patterns in here. I haven't even flipped through yet. Oh, there are. Oh, there's some crochet ones too. So if you want to knit or crochet some dishcloths, and I have to look at the crochet patterns, then you've got a pile of them in here. And there's lots of them. There's charts, there's instructions. Every one comes on their own page, more or less, all the instructions, plus a full picture of each. So there's like this lace one. There's a picture of the dishcloth, and then all of the instructions for it are over here. I don't think you can see that on the screen, can you? So that is this month's giveaway. To enter the giveaway, I'm going to put, let me see, Dishy Multi or one of the Dishy yarns up on the screen, and you can tell me which color is your favorite and you'd love to knit dishcloths with. And that is how I'll know you want to enter the giveaway. You can leave comments otherwise without mentioning anything like that, just to say hey and tell me about what you're knitting or your thoughts on the things I'm knitting. I love to read your comments and discuss things with you. But if you want to enter the giveaway, choose one of the colors that you can see on your screen right now. Leave me a comment telling me which color you like, and that will be your entry into the giveaway. And this is open worldwide, which for now, unless I end up where I'm paying like enormous shipping rates somewhere, we'll see, but so far it hasn't been so bad. And just the fine print, I'm the one sponsoring this giveaway. I bought all of this myself, and I'm gifting it to somebody out there. YouTube is not a sponsor, is not involved with this giveaway in any way. It's just completely self-sponsored. So this video is live on Thursday, August 31st, and we're going to let it stay open for a week, this giveaway. So you have until September 6th to enter the giveaway. And after that, on September 6th, I am going to use a random comment generator to choose one of the comments that mentions one of those colors. And then that's how I choose the winner. And I will leave a comment on the person who won. Nobody else can leave a comment. You can't get spam that says you're a giveaway winner or anything like that. I check all the comments carefully, and if something like that goes through, I delete it. So if you get a comment that's replying to yours from Nerdy Knitting saying you're a winner, I'll tell you you're a winner, and I'll give you my email address and tell you to send me your name and mailing address. So it's not spam, it really is me. I've had a few people who did not respond, and I had to choose other winners. It has happened. So make sure your notifications are turned on so you know if you get a response to your comment. That's the only way I can really get in touch with you, is to reply to your comment. That's it for this episode of the Nerdy Knitting Podcast. It was lovely to catch up with you again and get back to our regularly scheduled content. We have a lot of great content coming up. We're going to be talking about sweater fit, especially for larger busts, coming up in the next few months. And of course, all our sock tutorials, just so much great stuff to talk about when it comes to knitting. So I'm glad you joined me today. And if you're new here and want to catch up on past episodes, I'll put a playlist right here of past episodes of this season's podcast. And you can see the things I've been working on throughout the year. And if you've been hanging out with me for a while, I'll pop another video right here that maybe you haven't seen and you'd love to watch. So I will see you in the next video.